A single light still burned on the mountain, while an entire town was disappearing beneath the snow. The third knock nearly vanished beneath the roar of the blizzard. Tom yanked the door open, and a wall of icy wind slammed into the cabin. Snow stung his face like needles. Major lunged forward, barking into the white darkness as a shadow collapsed across the threshold. Behind it, something else was moving through the storm toward the ridge. What do you think was coming through the snow? By the fourth day of the blizzard, Coldwater Pass had almost disappeared. The little Montana town lay buried beneath a moving wall of white. Streets were gone. Fence lines were gone. The schoolhouse bell, which had hung above Main Street for nearly 70 years, was packed so thick with ice it no longer moved in the wind. Power lines sagged low and black between poles, then vanished into drifts taller than a pickup truck. Inside dark homes, families burned chair legs, broken shelves, old picture frames, anything that would catch. Roof beams groaned under the weight. Windows trembled in their frames. Somewhere near the edge of town, a barn gave a slow wooden cry and folded into the snow without a sound afterward. No one went outside unless they had to. No one could see farther than 10 feet. And still, sometime after midnight, a rumor moved from house to house like a match cupped against the wind. There was a light on Wolfpine Ridge. At first, nobody believed it. Wolfpine Ridge sat above town like a jagged shoulder of black stone, steep, exposed, and cruel even in good weather. In summer, it baked dry under the sun. In winter, the wind hit it hard enough to peel paint from wood. Folks in Coldwater Pass had laughed for months at the old veteran who had built his cabin up there, half tucked against a rock face, miles from comfort and common sense. They had called it a death trap. They had called him Mountain Tom. Some called him worse when he was not close enough to hear. But now, through gaps in the storm, just high enough above the valley, a faint yellow glow still burned against the cliffside. One light, weak, steady, impossible. Down in town, Mrs. Keller saw it first from her kitchen window while feeding a strip of chairwood into her stove. She pressed her hand against the frozen glass, blinked twice, and whispered for her husband. By dawn, the story had reached the post office, the church basement, and 3 families sheltering together inside the grocery store. Tom Whitaker's cabin was still lit. Up on Wolfpine Ridge, the wind struck the granite wall and split around it with a scream. Snow rushed past the mouth of the rock hollow in long white ropes, snapping through the darkness. But deeper inside the sheltered cut, where the cabin stood close against stone, the air barely moved. A lantern hung from a peg beside the door. Its flame trembled now and then, but it did not go out. Thomas Tom Whitaker sat at a rough pine table with a pencil in his right hand and an old green military ledger open beneath his wrist. He was 66 years old, broad through the shoulders still, though age had carved him down to bone and wire. His beard had gone white at the chin. A scar ran from the corner of his left eyebrow into the gray hair at his temple, pale as a scratch in old leather. He listened before he wrote. That was a habit he had never lost. Wind, stove, timber, snow sliding somewhere above the overhang. No cracking from the north wall. No change in draft near the lower vent. No smoke backing up through the pipe. Only then did he lower his eyes to the thermometer nailed beside the shelves. 65 degrees. Tom touched the pencil to paper. Day 4. Inside holding at 65. Wood use steady. North wall dry. He paused on the last word. Dry. For a long moment he stared at it, as if the word had weight. Across the room, the cast iron stove breathed orange through its front grate. A kettle sat on top, not boiling, just murmuring. Near the hearth, under 2 wool blankets, a woman named Maggie Doyle slept in a chair with her boots still on. 3 children lay curled together on a mattress Tom had dragged from the storage loft. An old ranch hand named Luis slept with his back against a flour sack, one frost-bitten hand wrapped in clean cloth. There were more people in the stone hollow beyond the cabin walls. Too many. Not enough yet. Tom knew that without looking. Beside the stove lay Major. The German shepherd's coat was dark across the back and tan along the legs, thick with winter fur. His muzzle had begun to gray, but his ears were still sharp, still listening. He had not paced since the storm began. He had not barked at the wind or clawed at the door. He lay with his head on his paws, eyes half open, calm in a way that made the room feel steadier than the logs beneath it. Every few minutes, Major's eyes moved to Tom, then to the door, then back again. Tom closed the ledger and laid his palm flat over the cover. Outside, the storm hammered the mountain like it had a debt to collect. Down in Coldwater Pass, roofs were failing, chimneys were choking, and people who had mocked him were running out of heat in the dark. Inside the cabin, the fire held, the walls held, the mountain held. Tom looked toward the door, where snow hissed along the threshold like sand. Major lifted his head. A second later, through the scream of the blizzard, came a sound so faint most men would have missed it. One knock, then another. Tom stood slowly, his chair scraping the floor. Major was already on his feet. 7 months earlier, Wolfpine Ridge had not looked like a place that could save anyone. It looked like punishment. The slope rose above Coldwater Pass in a broken line of gray rock, scrub pine, dry grass, and wind-bent cedar. In July, the sun hit the stone so hard it shimmered. The dirt road ended almost a mile below the ridge, where a rusted cattle gate leaned sideways on one hinge. From there, a man had to walk unless he owned a mule with a stubborn heart. That morning, the whole town had gathered inside the Coldwater Grange Hall for the county land sale. Folding chairs scraped across the floor. Farmers fanned themselves with auction sheets. Men in seed caps studied parcel maps like they were reading the future. Good land went first. Creek lots, flat pasture, old hayfields, a few wooded parcels near the North Road. People bid quick and loud on those. They wanted land that made sense. Land where water already moved. Land where a house could sit square and proud with a porch facing the valley. Tom Whitaker sat in the back row with Major lying beneath his chair. He did not bid on the creek. He did not bid on the meadow. He did not raise his hand when 3 acres beside the main road sold for less than he had expected. Instead, he watched the big survey map pinned to the wall. His eyes stayed on the upper corner, where the county had marked one steep piece of stone and brush with a thin black line. Parcel 19, Wolfpine Ridge, 40 acres, most of it useless to anyone who wanted cattle, crops, or convenience. The auctioneer finally reached it near the end, after the room had grown hot and restless. "Parcel 19, he called, glancing once at the sheet and then over his spectacles. Upper Wolfpine Slope, no power access, no well on record, no maintained road beyond the lower gate, mostly rock. County assessment says limited agricultural value." A few men chuckled before bidding even started. The auctioneer lifted his eyebrows. "Opening at 500. Silence. Somebody near the front muttered, "Goat land." Another man said, "Goats would file a complaint." Laughter moved across the room, low and easy. Major lifted his head beneath Tom's chair. Tom did not move. 500, the auctioneer repeated. "Anybody?" Tom raised one hand. The room turned. He could feel it before he saw it. That old shift in the air, when people stopped seeing a man and started seeing a story they already wanted to tell. Dale Mercer stood near the side wall, arms crossed over a pearl-snap shirt, hat pushed back on his forehead. He owned 600 acres down in the valley and liked standing in rooms as if he had built them himself. He looked at Tom's raised hand, then at the map, then back at Tom. "Whitaker," Dale called, loud enough for the back rows. "You planning to farm rocks now?" A few people laughed harder. Tom lowered his hand only after the auctioneer nodded. "I have 500, the auctioneer said. "Do I hear 6? No one answered. Dale grinned. "Better throw in a ladder. Man'll need it just to get to bed." More laughter. Tom's left hand slid under the edge of his jacket and rested for 1 second against his ribs. Not fear, not anger, just the old habit of checking himself, counting the room, marking exits. Front door, side door, kitchen door behind the stage. Major's tail thumped once against the wood floor, slow and steady. The auctioneer waited, shrugged, and brought the gavel down. Sold. Parcel 19 to Thomas Whitaker. That should have ended it. It did not. By noon, the joke had already moved to the diner, the feed store, and the gas pumps outside Lenny's market. By supper, half the town had heard that old Tom Whitaker had spent almost everything he had on a frozen goat trail above Coldwater Pass. Some said it gently, some did not. They said the war had followed him home and finally caught up. They said he had lived alone too long. They said no man with a clean mind would choose a ridge when there was valley land to be had. Tom heard pieces of it when he stepped out of the county office with the deed folded inside his coat. Major walked at his left knee, close but not touching. A diesel truck backfired on Main Street. The sound cracked against the brick storefronts. Tom dropped half an inch before he stopped himself. His shoulder tightened. His eyes snapped to the roofline across the street, then to the alley beside the post office. His fingers curled once, empty. A woman carrying groceries noticed and looked away too quickly. Major pressed his shoulder into Tom's leg. Tom inhaled through his nose. Coldwater Pass returned around him. July heat, dust, a boy licking ice cream outside the market, a flag snapping above the courthouse. No smoke, no incoming, no contact. Just a truck, just Montana. He placed one hand briefly between Major's ears, then crossed the street without looking back. 3 days later, Tom climbed Wolf Pine Ridge for the first time as its owner. He carried a canteen, a folding shovel, an old compass, a coil of cord, and a green notebook with water stains along the cover. Major ranged ahead, nose low, ears moving with every shift of wind. The climb was harder than it looked from town. Loose stone rolled under Tom's boots. Grass hid shallow holes. Pine roots hooked at his soles. By the time he reached the upper shelf, sweat had soaked the back of his shirt, and his bad knee had started its deep, private ache. He stopped near the place everyone else had dismissed. A rock hollow cut into the ridge face, wider than it looked from below. Not a cave. Not exactly. More like a granite bite taken out of the mountain. The back wall stood solid and cool. Above it, stone pushed outward in a natural overhang. The mouth faced southeast, away from the worst western wind. Tom stood there a long time. He watched dust move across the slope. He watched dry grass bend and settle. He watched a hawk hang in the air above the valley, without flapping once. Then he looked down. Major had already chosen his spot. The German shepherd lay near the back of the hollow, not in the shade exactly, but in a narrow patch where the air sat still. His front paws were crossed. His eyes were half closed. He looked less like a dog resting after a climb than a sentry who had found the right post. Tom stepped into the hollow. The temperature changed. Not much. Enough. The ridge wind slipped past the opening, loud along the stone lip, but inside the hollow it softened. The heat of the day remained in the rock without pressing down like it did on the open slope. Tom crouched and set his palm against the dirt. Dry. He moved toward the back wall, knocked twice on the granite, then looked up at the overhang. No staining from steady runoff. no moss thick enough to suggest trapped water. Lichen grew pale and tight along the stone face. Old snow lines from past winters marked cracks near the entrance, but not deep inside. He opened the notebook and wrote, "Southeast face, windbreak natural, dry floor, rock mass stable." Major settled without command. He paused, glanced at the dog, and added one more line. Dog found calm pocket first. Later that afternoon, Dale Mercer rode up on a bay horse with 2 ranch hands behind him. They stopped at the edge of the slope and looked into the hollow, as if expecting to find Tom digging his own grave. Dale laughed first. "Well, I'll be," he said. "You really are moving into the mountain." Tom stood with the compass in one hand and the notebook in the other. Dale swept his hat toward the valley below. "Down there, you get grass, water, a road, neighbors. Up here, you get wind, rock, and a long walk to regret." Tom closed the notebook. Major stood then, slow and quiet. One of the ranch hands took half a step back without meaning to. Dale noticed and smirked. "Easy. I'm not here to steal his rocks." Tom looked past him toward the valley. From up here, Coldwater Pass seemed peaceful, tucked between fields and dark timber, smoke rising in soft lines from chimneys, though it was nowhere near winter. That was what most people saw. Summer. Tom saw the low ground where cold air would settle. He saw the open flats where wind could run without breaking. He saw the roofs spaced too far from woodpiles. He saw roads that would drift shut before noon in a hard storm. Dale followed his gaze and shook his head. "What exactly do you think you're seeing?" Tom folded the deed map and slid it into his coat. "You're looking at summer dirt," he said. Dale's smile faded a little. Tom looked back at the stone hollow, where Major stood steady in the quiet air. "I'm looking for a place to survive winter." For a second, no one laughed. Then Dale snorted, turned his horse, and rode back down toward town. By evening, the new joke had a sharper edge. Old Tom Whitaker was not just building on goat land. He thought the mountain was going to save him. Tom heard that one too. He heard it 2 days later at the hardware store, when he bought nails. He heard it outside the diner when men stopped talking as he passed. He heard it in the way children repeated Mountain Tom without knowing why adults smiled. He never corrected them. Each morning, he climbed the ridge. Each evening, he came down with dust on his jeans and numbers in his book. And every time he reached the granite hollow, Major went ahead of him, circled once, and lay in the same still pocket near the back wall. As if the dog already knew something the town had not yet learned. Tom Whitaker had learned to trust dogs before he trusted men. That habit began long before Coldwater Pass, long before Wolf Pine Ridge, long before his beard turned white, and folks in town began speaking to him in the soft, careful tone people use around something cracked. It began in Afghanistan, in a valley where the mountains were not green and gentle, but brown, sharp, and watchful. Back then, Tom had been Staff Sergeant Whitaker, Army Corps of Engineers, attached to a small logistics unit that moved between remote posts and temporary supply points. His job was not glorious. He did not kick down doors or stand in front of cameras. He studied ground, wind, water, and distance. He picked places where men could sleep without freezing, where trucks would not sink axle deep in mud, where a temporary LZ would not become a trap when weather turned. He could look at a slope and know where runoff would go. He could see a dry wash and imagine it full of violent water. He could smell bad snow before younger soldiers knew enough to look up. That was why they came to him when they needed a fuel cache to survive 3 weeks. That was why lieutenants half his age stopped arguing after the first winter. Tom did not talk much, but his shelters held. His routes stayed open longer than anyone expected. His men learned that when Whitaker stared at a ridgeline too long, It was best to wait until he finished seeing whatever the rest of them had missed. The night that stayed with him came in the Korangal. It was late winter. Snow had fallen all afternoon, loose and pretty at first, then thick enough to flatten sound. The unit was moving supplies toward a small outpost when the weather closed around them faster than the radio reports had promised. A narrow trail cut along the side of a mountain. Below it, the dark dropped away into nothing. Above it, stone and ice leaned over them like a roof ready to fail. Tom remembered the color of the sky. Not black, not gray. A strange, dull silver that made every shadow look false. Their dog then was not Major. His name was Cooper, a lean shepherd mix with scarred ears and a nose that had found 2 buried pressure plates in 1 month. Cooper stopped first. He froze in the trail, one paw lifted, body low. Tom saw it and raised his fist. Halt! The line stopped behind him. Then somewhere ahead, metal clinked against stone. A tiny sound. A wrong sound. Tom turned his head, and the mountain opened with light. Afterward, people used clean words. Ambush, contact, bad weather, limited visibility, 2 casualties, 1 canine lost. Tom remembered different things. A glove lying palm up in the snow, the taste of blood where he had bitten the inside of his cheek, a young corporal named Bennett asking where his boot went, because shock had made the question sound reasonable. Cooper not moving. Radio static in his ear. His own voice repeating grid coordinates into the dark, like if he said them clearly enough, the night might give back what it had taken. It did not. Years later, in Montana, the smallest sounds could still drag part of that valley into a room. A garbage truck hitting a pothole, a hunting rifle cracking across a pasture, a loose piece of tin snapping in wind. At first, Coldwater Pass did not know what to make of Tom. He paid cash. He kept his yard neat. He fixed small things for people and refused payment more often than not. But he also sat with his back to walls. He knew who entered a room without turning his head. He stepped aside when trucks backfired, not out of fear exactly, but with the speed of a body that had learned before thought. Children noticed. Adults pretended not to. Major noticed everything. Tom had found him 4 years earlier outside a shuttered feed mill east of Billings. The dog had been tied to a fence with baling wire and a length of orange rope. No tag, no owner. Ribs showing under dirty fur. One paw cut and crusted with dried blood. When Tom approached, the shepherd did not bark. He only watched him, eyes steady, ears half up, as if deciding whether this man was worth the energy. Tom had crouched 10 feet away and set down half a gas station sandwich. The dog looked at the sandwich, then at Tom, then back at the sandwich. "Your call," Tom said. The dog waited until Tom turned his face slightly away before eating. Not fast, not greedy. Careful, like manners were the last thing he owned. Tom named him Major by the end of the week, not because the dog acted important, but because he carried himself like he had once outranked everybody in the room. Since then, Major had become the line between Tom and the parts of the world that still came at him sideways. On bad nights, when sleep broke open around 2 in the morning, Tom would sit on the edge of the bed with both feet planted, counting quietly. Door, window, stove, north wall, rifle unloaded in the cabinet, knife on the shelf, Major breathing on the rug. Sometimes his hands shook before the rest of him knew why. Sometimes he woke standing in the kitchen with the old flashlight in his hand, listening for a radio that had not spoken in 15 years. Major never jumped at him, never whined, never made the room smaller. He would rise from the rug, cross the floor, and press his head under Tom's palm. If Tom did not respond, the dog leaned his full weight against his shin until Tom had to feel what was there. Fur, heat, a living thing. Montana. Not Afghanistan. One August night, after the land sale, a storm rolled through Coldwater Pass with no rain, only wind and dry thunder beyond the ridges. Tom was sleeping in the small rented room behind Lenny's old garage while he worked on the cabin by day. A metal trash can lid outside tore loose and clattered hard across the alley. Tom came awake on the floor. He did not remember leaving the bed. His shoulder hit the dresser. His hand closed around the folding knife he kept under a boot. His mouth had already formed the word clear before he saw the moonlight on the cheap curtains. Major was at the door, but not barking. The dog looked back once, then walked to Tom and sat. Tom's breath came short through his nose. He listened to the lid rolling again outside. He counted without meaning to. One sound. Alley. No footsteps. No voices. No secondary. Major lowered his head onto Tom's knee. The knife clicked shut in Tom's hand. For a long time, they stayed that way on the floorboards, man and dog in a rented room that smelled of oil, dust, and old pine paneling. Tom did not speak. Major did not need him to. At dawn, Tom climbed Wolf Pine Ridge with dark circles under his eyes and a thermos of coffee he barely touched. The town below was waking. Smoke rose from chimneys in thin blue lines. A school bus coughed to life near the church. Somewhere a dog barked twice and quit. Ordinary sounds. Safe sounds. Sounds that still arrived in Tom's body wearing old uniforms. He reached the granite hollow slower than usual. Major ran ahead, then stopped in the calm pocket near the back wall. Tom stood at the mouth of the hollow and looked out over Coldwater Pass. From up there, the town seemed peaceful enough to forgive itself. White church steeple, red barns, silver water tower, the kind of place people believed would hold because it always had. Tom knew better than to trust the shape of a thing in good weather. He had seen solid ground become a kill zone. He had seen safe roads disappear under snow. He had seen men laugh an hour before the world changed. He took out his notebook and began marking the hollow again. Not as a dream now. Not as a strange idea bought at auction. As an AO. A place to study. A place to secure. A place that might have to hold if everything below failed. He paced the opening, checked the angle of the sun, measured the distance from stone wall to wind line, tapped the granite with the back of his knife, and listened for hollow sound. Major watched him without moving. Near noon, Maggie Doyle climbed partway up the ridge with a canvas mailbag over one shoulder. She was the post office clerk, widowed 3 winters earlier, with a limp from an old horse accident and a way of looking at people that made lies feel like extra weight. She stopped below the hollow, breathing hard. "Tom," she called. He turned, already knowing where his nearest tools lay. Maggie noticed. Her eyes flicked once to the shovel, then back to his face. She did not comment. "County sent your final deed copy," she said, holding up an envelope. "Figured I'd save you a walk down." Tom came to meet her. "Appreciate it." She looked past him into the granite cut. Major stood and came forward, tail low but friendly. Maggie held out the back of her hand. The dog sniffed once, then allowed a brief touch between his ears. "He likes this place," she said. Tom glanced at the hollow. "He found the best part before I did." Maggie studied the stone overhang, the dry floor, the way the wind curled past without entering. "Folks are still talking. They need hobbies." A small smile touched her mouth, then faded. "Some of it's not kind." Tom slid the deed copy into his coat. "Kind doesn't build much." "No," Maggie said, "but neither does being alone all the time." The wind moved between them. Major stepped closer to Tom's leg. For a moment, Tom looked older than he had when she arrived. Not weak, just worn in places no one could patch from the outside. "I'm not alone," he said. Maggie looked down at Major, then back at the half-formed plans marked in Tom's notebook. "No," she said softly. "I suppose you're not." She left him there under the granite lip, and by late afternoon the first lines of the cabin existed in cord and stakes. Tom worked until the sun dropped behind the western ridges. When the valley went gold, Major stood suddenly and stared down toward Coldwater Pass. His ears lifted, his body went still. Tom followed his gaze. Nothing moved but distant dust along the road. Still, the hair along the back of Tom's neck rose. He had learned long ago that survival was not about being brave. It was about noticing small things before they became big ones. He bent, picked up a stake, and drove it deeper into the dry ground. The sound cracked once against the stone. Major did not flinch. Neither did Tom. By the second week of August, the first load of lumber reached the lower gate. Tom had no crew waiting for him there. No sons. No hired hands. No neighbor leaning on a tailgate with a thermos of coffee and a free afternoon. Just an old flatbed trailer, a stack of rough-cut pine, 2 coils of rope, and Major standing in the dust with his tongue hanging slightly from the heat. Tom looked up the ridge. The granite hollow waited above them, gray and still beneath the hard blue sky. "Long walk," he said. Major looked at him once, then started up the trail. Tom laughed under his breath. "That's your answer for everything." The work was slow enough to make a young man curse and an old man plan better. Tom could not carry full beams on his shoulder anymore. Not the way he once had. His right knee complained before noon. His lower back tightened before supper. So he did what he had learned to do in places where strength ran out before the job did. He broke the problem into pieces: short hauls, rest points, rope pulls, stacking zones. He rigged a simple drag sled from scrap boards and old fencing wire. Major learned fast. Tom clipped a padded harness around the dog's chest, loaded only what the animal could pull safely, and walked beside him up the first stretch. The shepherd leaned into the harness with steady patience, paws digging into dust, stopping whenever Tom touched his flank. They moved lumber like that for days, a board at a time, a bundle at a time. No hurry, no wasted motion. At dawn, Tom marked the day's tasks in his notebook. By sunset, he checked them off with a pencil worn flat on one side. Major slept hard each night beneath the temporary tarp, paws twitching, coat dusty, ears still moving at every strange sound. The first thing Tom built was not a wall. It was the floor. Most people would have started by clearing and leveling everything flat, fighting the mountain until the mountain looked more like a yard. Tom did the opposite. He studied where the ground already held firm, placed stone piers under the main beams, and lifted the floor high enough for air to pass beneath it. He left the back line close to the granite but never touching, a finger's width in some places. More where water might travel, wood needs to breathe, he muttered once, mostly to himself. Major lay in the calm pocket and watched sawdust gather on the stones. By late August, the frame began to rise. From Coldwater Pass, people could see it if they knew where to look. A strange little skeleton of posts and beams tucked under the granite lip, not proud on open ground, not square against the road, not facing town the way a proper house should. It looked half hidden before it had walls. That bothered people more than Tom expected. Houses in Coldwater Pass stood where folks could see them. Porches faced roads, windows faced neighbors, smoke rose where others could count it. Tom's cabin seemed to turn its shoulder to the world. So the visitors came. Some walked up on Sundays after church. Some rode horses to the lower gate and climbed the rest just to say they had seen it. Boys dared each other to touch the frame. Men stood with thumbs hooked in suspenders and offered advice Tom had not requested. Door ought to face south. Too close to the stone. You'll never keep mice out. Snow slides off that ledge, you'll be buried before breakfast. Tom answered with nods when answers were required. Most of the time, he kept working. One afternoon, Ray Collins climbed the ridge wearing clean work pants and a carpenter's belt he did not need for the visit. Ray was 58, narrow-eyed and respected. He had built half the barns in the valley and repaired the rest. If a wall stood straight in Coldwater Pass, somebody usually said Ray had either built it or judged it. He walked around Tom's frame without speaking. Tom kept shaving the end of a joist. Major stood near the tool pile, eyes on Ray's hands. Finally, Ray stopped beside the back wall line and placed his palm on the granite. "Stone holds cold," he said. Tom set the plane down. "Some stone does. It holds moisture, too. Some places do." Ray looked at him. "You keep answering like that, folks will keep calling you crazy." Tom lifted the joist into place and checked the fit. Ray stepped closer. "I'm not here to laugh at you." Tom glanced at him then. There was truth in Ray's voice. Not kindness, exactly. More like professional irritation. The kind a good builder felt when he saw another man making what looked like a costly mistake. Ray pointed to the granite overhang. "That rock sweats when temperatures swing. You frame too tight. Moisture gets trapped. Wool insulation holds it. Then rot starts where you can't see it. Give it 2 winters, you'll be tearing out half your wall." Tom walked to the back line and showed him the gap. Then the marked vent channel. Then the slope he had cut beneath the pier stones for drainage. Ray listened. His expression did not change. "You've thought about it," he said. "I have. Thinking doesn't stop water." "No," Tom said, "but it tells water where to go." Ray looked at the frame, the raised floor, the half-finished wall layout, the stacks of wool packed in burlap sacks. Then he looked at Major, who had not moved from the tool pile. "Dog always stare like that?" "When he's deciding." "Deciding what?" Tom picked up the plane again. "Whether you're a problem." Ray gave a short breath that might have been a laugh. "And?" Tom ran the plane along the joist. A clean curl of wood fell to his boot. "He hasn't bit you?" Ray shook his head, but before leaving, he walked the site one more time. At the edge of the hollow, he paused and looked down at Coldwater Pass spread bright in the valley. "You know," he said without turning, "people don't like a man building something they don't understand." Tom kept his eyes on the board. "I've noticed." Ray started down the trail. "Doesn't mean they're wrong." "No," Tom said quietly. "It doesn't." That evening, the mayor came. Alan Briggs did not climb well, and by the time he reached the hollow, sweat had darkened his collar. He wore a gray vest despite the heat and carried a leather folder under one arm like the ridge might respect paperwork. "Tom," he said, catching his breath, "this is becoming a topic." Tom was setting the first layer of exterior boards. "Topics are free." The mayor did not smile. "There are concerns." "About?" "Safety, access, fire risk, emergency response." Alan glanced at the granite hollow as if the stone itself were an ordinance violation. "If you intend to establish residency here, the town council has an interest in making sure this structure does not become a hazard." Major moved from the shade and sat beside Tom. Alan noticed but continued. "You're isolated. If something goes wrong in winter, no one can reach you." Tom set a nail, struck it twice, clean and even. "Maybe that's true," he said. "That doesn't concern you?" Tom looked toward the valley. The late sun laid gold over the rooftops, the barns, the open streets where winter had not yet shown its hand. "It concerns me," he said, "just not the way it concerns you." The mayor pressed his lips together. I'm trying to be reasonable. So am I. Alan opened his folder, then seemed to think better of it. The climb back down waited behind him. The old veteran in front of him had dust in his beard, sweat on his shirt, and a dog that watched too carefully. I hope you know what you're doing, the mayor said. Tom drove another nail. So do I. By September, the cabin had walls, not ordinary walls. Tom built them thick, with a dead air gap and wool packed behind boards he had treated with linseed oil. He installed small vents low on one side and high on the other, each with sliding covers. The door opened inward, because outward doors could freeze shut against drifted snow. The main window faced southeast, catching morning light deep into the hollow. The stovepipe ran short and protected through a shielded section near the rock, where wind would not tear at it directly. Every choice looked odd to someone. Every choice had a reason. Tom did not explain unless asked by someone who truly wanted the answer. Maggie Doyle came twice with mail and once with a jar of peaches she claimed she had canned too many of. She stood inside the unfinished cabin and ran one hand along the double wall. It's quiet in here, she said. Tom nodded. It was true. Even without the roof finished, the hollow softened sound. The valley wind moved above and around them, but inside the frame, noise lost its teeth. Maggie looked at the notebook on a crate beside the door. Still writing it all down? Every morning, every evening. Temperatures? That. Wind. Moisture. Wood use once the stove's in. Sounds like evidence. Tom glanced at her. Evidence only matters if somebody looks at it. Maggie's eyes rested on him a moment longer than expected. Sometimes people look late. When she left, Major followed her to the edge of the hollow, watched her descend the trail, then returned to his place by the door. The roof went on during the first week of October. Cold had begun to touch the mornings. Frost silvered the dry grass before sunrise. Tom's hands ached in the knuckles when he tied knots. His knee stiffened after every climb. More than once he caught himself standing too still, staring at nothing, hearing again the far-off radio crackle of another mountain in another country. Major always broke those moments the same way. A nose to the hand, a shoulder against the leg, a warm body leaning into the present. On the day the stove arrived, Dale Mercer rode up again with 2 men and a paper sack of apples he did not offer to share. He watched Tom and Major drag the heavy black stove across the stone floor, using pipe rollers and a block-and-tackle rig anchored to the rear beam. Well, Dale said, chewing slowly, I'll give you this. You made the fanciest cave in Montana. Tom guided the stove another inch. Major stood in harness, waiting for the next command. Dale looked around at the thick walls, the small window, the raised floor, the vents, the food cellar cut into earth at the rear. His smile stayed, but his eyes moved more than his mouth. You really think this place is going to beat winter? Tom checked the stove position against the chalk marks on the floor. No. Dale blinked. No? Tom straightened slowly. One hand braced against his lower back. I think winter beats men who think they're fighting it. He looked toward the granite overhang above them. I'm not building this place to beat anything. Dale frowned. Then what are you doing? Tom reached for his notebook, opened to a page filled with numbers, and wrote the stove placement time in the margin. I'm giving the mountain less work to do, huh? Dale stared at him, then gave a laugh too loud for the hollow. But the sound did not carry far. The granite swallowed most of it before it reached the trees. For a while, the cabin seemed to prove itself quietly. October settled over Wolf Pine Ridge with blue mornings and hard silver frost. The valley below turned gold, then brown, then bare. Smoke began rising from chimneys in Coldwater Pass before breakfast. Ranchers patched barn roofs. Children dragged coats from closets. Men talked about snow tires outside Lenny's market and pretended they were not watching the ridge. Tom watched everything. Each morning he stepped outside before coffee, stood beneath the granite overhang, and listened to the mountain breathe. The first freeze came on a Tuesday. Outside temperature, 24. Inside, 58 before stove. 64 after one small fire. Wood used, less than quarter stack. He wrote it all down in the green ledger, his pencil moving in short, square letters. Major would sit beside him at the table, head level with the edge, eyes following the pencil, as if the numbers mattered to him too. By the second week, Tom began to trust the pattern. Not fully. Never fully. Trust for him was something earned in layers. A bridge did not become safe because it held one truck. A trail did not become clear because the first mile was quiet. A shelter did not become winter-ready because October was kind. Still, the cabin held. Morning light came deep through the southeast window and touched the pine floor. The stove warmed the stone behind it, and the stone gave the heat back slowly after the fire dropped low. The wind often tore along the outer ridge, but inside the hollow, the sound arrived softened and distant, like weather happening to someone else. Major slept near the stove. Tom slept in the narrow bed against the inner wall, never more than 4 hours at a time, but sometimes 4 was enough. Then, one morning, Major would not leave the north corner. It was still dark when Tom noticed. The dog stood with his nose near the lower seam of the wall, breathing slow through his muzzle. Not sniffing for mice, not curious, working. His tail hung level, still as a pointer. Tom sat up. The cabin was quiet. The fire had burned down to coals. Outside, the wind moved lightly over the stone lip. Nothing urgent. Nothing obvious. Major. The dog did not turn. Tom reached for the flashlight on the crate beside the bed. His bare feet touched the cold floor. He crossed the room without lighting the lantern and crouched near the north wall. Major stepped back just enough to give him space. Tom ran his hand along the boards. Dry. At first. Then his fingertips found it. A narrow coolness beneath the lowest plank. Not wet enough to shine. Not enough to drip. Just a faint line where the wood felt different from the boards around it. Tom stayed crouched for nearly a minute. Then he stood, pulled on his boots, and lit the lantern. By morning, the first board was off. Behind it, the wool insulation looked fine on the surface. But when Tom reached deeper into the cavity, his fingers came back damp. He brought them to his nose. Cold water. No rot yet. But water had no manners. Given time, it would go where it wanted and ruin what men thought they had finished. He removed 2 more boards, then 4. By noon, half the north section lay open, wool piled on a clean tarp, the frame exposed in the pale light. The problem appeared small. That made it worse. Warm air from inside had been slipping into a dead pocket near the stone where Tom's ventilation path slowed before reaching the upper vent. When the temperature dropped hard at night, moisture collected where it could not move. By morning, it had nowhere to go except into the wool and wood. Ray Collins had warned him. Not entirely right. Not entirely wrong. Tom stood with one hand against the open frame, jaw tight, listening to a drop fall somewhere inside the wall. Major sat beside the tools, watching him. That afternoon, Maggie arrived with mail and a small bundle wrapped in cloth. She stopped at the door when she saw the wall opened. "Oh," she said. Tom did not look up. "Coffee's on the stove." She stepped inside slowly. "What happened?" "Moisture pocket." "Bad?" "Not if I fix it." Maggie set the bundle on the table. And if you don't? Tom pulled a strip of damp wool from the cavity and dropped it onto the tarp. The wet sound it made was answer enough. Maggie said nothing for a while. The open wall made the whole cabin feel vulnerable, as if someone had peeled back skin and found a bruise beneath. "Ray will hear," she said. "Likely. Dale, too. Faster than Ray." She almost smiled, but the look on Tom's face stopped it. Outside, wind combed dry grass along the ridge. A raven crossed low over the hollow and vanished beyond the stone. Tom picked up the lantern and held it near the exposed frame, studying shadows, gaps, flow paths. His eyes moved the way they did when he was no longer in a room with another person, but inside a problem. Maggie recognized it and left the mail on the table. The news reached town before supper. By the next morning, people at the diner were talking about the wet wall. Dale Mercer made sure of it. He sat at his usual table near the window, boots stretched out, coffee untouched, telling anyone within earshot that Mountain Tom had finally discovered what every normal man already knew. "You build in a rock hole," Dale said. "You get a wet coffin." Laughter followed, but not from everyone. Ray Collins sat at the counter, one hand around a mug, eyes fixed on nothing. He did not laugh. He did not defend Tom either. Maggie heard the whole thing while picking up a to-go order. She paid without a word and stepped back into the cold. Up on Wolf Pine Ridge, Tom had already stripped the north wall down to frame. He did not go to town. He did not answer jokes he could not hear. He worked. He cut a new air channel, higher and wider, using a handsaw and chisel because the angle was too tight for anything else. He pulled out every section of wool that had taken moisture and hung it near the stove to dry. He drilled 2 small inspection holes where no one would see them unless they knew where to look. He shaped a narrow baffle that would keep warm interior air from rushing straight into cold stone, forcing it instead along a path where it could dry before settling. The work took longer than it should have. His hands cramped by evening. His knee swelled under the brace. At dusk, he sat on the floor with his back against the opposite wall and stared at the open cavity. The stove ticked softly behind him. Major came over and nosed his wrist. Tom did not move. In the exposed frame, the empty space looked too much like a gap in armor, too much like something missed. He saw snow again for half a second. Not Montana snow, the other kind. Dirty along the edges, lit by flares, a shadow where Cooper had fallen. Bennett's voice asking the same impossible question. "Where did my boot go?" Tom closed his eyes hard. Major pushed his head under Tom's hand, forcing the palm open. The room came back in pieces. Pine floor, iron stove, wet wool drying on a line, a dog breathing against his wrist. Tom looked down. Major's eyes held steady. "Yeah," Tom whispered, his voice rough. "I'm here." The dog stayed until Tom stood. For 3 nights, Tom slept in a chair facing the north wall. Every 2 hours, he woke without an alarm, lit the flashlight, checked the inspection holes, touched the frame, looked for frost. Major rose each time and followed him, limping slightly from the day's hauling, but refusing to stay down. On the 4th morning, the temperature dropped to 18. Tom opened the wall before sunrise. No frost. He waited another day, then another. Still dry. Only then did he begin closing the boards again. By the time Ray Collins climbed the ridge a week later, the wall was sealed, the new vent covers installed, and the ledger held 6 pages of notes on the failure and repair. Ray stood inside the cabin with his hat in his hands. Tom said nothing. Ray looked at the north wall. "Heard you had trouble." "Had." Ray ran his fingers along the boards, then crouched near the lower vent. What did you change? Tom handed him the ledger. Ray did not expect that. He took it slowly and read 3 pages without speaking. Measurements, temperatures, moisture location, repair notes, air path changes, test results. No excuses. No pride. Just facts. When he finished, he closed the book. You could have ignored it, Ray said. Tom slid the ledger back onto the table. That's how things fail. Ray looked at him then, really looked, as if trying to decide whether the old soldier was stubborn or something rarer. Down by the stove, Major watched both men. Ray put his hat back on. Town thinks this proves you were wrong. Tom glanced at the repaired wall. No, he said. It proved the cabin wasn't finished teaching me. Ray had no answer for that. He left before sunset. That night, the first real snow fell on Wolf Pine Ridge. Not much, just a thin white dusting across the stones and pine needles. Tom stepped outside with his coat unbuttoned and stood beneath the granite overhang. The snow drifted past the opening, light and quiet, barely crossing the threshold before the wind carried it away. Major came to stand beside him. Together, they watched the ridge turn pale. For the first time since buying the land, Tom allowed himself to place one hand on the cabin wall and leave it there. The wood stayed dry beneath his palm. But far below, in Coldwater Pass, Dale Mercer was laughing again, and winter had not yet truly begun. The first weeks of winter came softly. Snow dusted Wolf Pine Ridge in thin layers, then melted from the exposed stone by noon. Coldwater Pass settled into its usual rhythm of short days and yellow windows. Men fed cattle before sunrise. Children walked to school with scarves over their mouths. Trucks idled outside the diner, exhaust rolling white into the street. Nothing looked dangerous. That was what bothered Tom. A normal winter announced itself in familiar ways. Snow gathered on the western slopes first. Crows worked the fence lines below town. Wind came down from the north, hard and clean, then settled for days at a time. The mountain had patterns if a man stopped treating weather like conversation and started treating it like movement. This year, the movement was wrong. Tom noticed it before Christmas. Snow landed where it should not have stayed and vanished from places where it should have built up. The western ridge remained stripped nearly bare after 2 storms, while shallow gullies east of town began collecting deep pockets of powder. At dawn, the air sometimes flowed uphill for 10 minutes, soft and strange, then snapped back west as if pulled by a hand. Major noticed earlier. The dog stopped sleeping through the night. At first, Tom thought it was age. Major was not young anymore. His muzzle had gone pale around the mouth, and cold mornings stiffened his hips. But the dog did not pace from discomfort. He went to the door, stood there, and listened. Not toward the trail, not toward town. West. Always west. On the 3rd night, Tom woke to the faint scrape of claws against wood. He opened his eyes. The cabin was dark except for the dull red eye of the stove. Major stood at the southeast window, nose lifted, ears forward, body still enough to look carved. Tom swung his feet to the floor. No sound outside but wind. He crossed the room quietly and looked past the dog's head into black glass. Their reflections stared back at him. Old man, old dog, both listening to something the room could not yet hear. What is it? Major gave one low rumble, not a growl at a person. Lower, deeper. A warning that began in the chest and stayed there. Tom opened the door. Cold struck his face, sharp but not brutal. Snow lay thin across the ground, shining under a half moon. The valley below slept in scattered lights. Far west, beyond the ridges, clouds pressed low against the horizon in a flat, dark band. Major stepped onto the porch and lifted his nose. He did not bark. He breathed. Tom followed the dog's line and watched the sky. After a moment, he went back inside, took the green ledger from the shelf, and wrote down the time. 2:17 a.m. Dog alert. Western cloud bank. Wind inconsistent. The next morning, the barometer had fallen more than Tom liked. He tapped it once to be sure the needle was not stuck. It was not. Major refused breakfast until Tom carried the bowl outside. Even then, the shepherd ate only half, stopping twice to stare toward the ridgeline. When Tom gathered firewood from the covered stack, Major followed him closer than usual, pressing against his leg each time the wind shifted. At noon, a truck on the valley road hit a patch of ice and fishtailed. Its engine roared, tires spun, then the muffler cracked a loud, flat pop that slapped up the mountainside. Tom dropped behind the woodpile before the sound finished. His hands found the frozen ground, his shoulder tucked. His eyes swept left to right. Stone lip, door, tree line, no muzzle flash, no dust kick, no second report. But the body was faster than Montana. For half a second he was back in tan snow and hard light, hearing someone yell contact over a radio swallowed by static. Major hit him from the side. Not hard enough to hurt, hard enough to move him. The dog shoved his chest against Tom's ribs and planted himself between Tom and the valley, barking once, sharp and commanding. The sound cut through the old noise in Tom's head. Tom blinked. Pine, snow, cold air. Major's fur under his hand. The woodpile beside him. A truck down below grinding back onto the road. Tom slowly sat back on his heels. His breathing came rough through his nose. He opened his fingers one at a time, finding splinters pressed into his palm. Major turned and put his muzzle against Tom's chin. Tom let out a breath that almost became a laugh, but did not. "Clear," he whispered. Major stayed there. Tom stood after a minute and looked toward the western ridge again. The dog's attention had already returned to it. Whatever was coming, Major had not forgotten. That afternoon, Tom began a different kind of preparation. He checked every vent twice. He moved the backup firewood closer to the inner wall, not stacked too tight, leaving air paths clear. He filled both water barrels and slid them farther from the entrance where hard freeze would be slower to reach. He tied thin lengths of rope between the cabin door, the animal shelter, and the covered wood stack, each line waist-high, each knot large enough to find with mittens on. Then he went down the trail and planted the first reflective stake, a narrow piece of pine with a metal strip nailed near the top. He placed it beside the old game path that climbed from the valley. Major watched from 10 yards ahead, ears still west. Tom planted another stake 20 paces higher. Then another. By dark, a broken line of markers led from the lower gate toward the granite hollow. To most eyes, they looked like wasted effort. To Tom, they were a route in whiteout, a way to move when eyes failed. The next day, he brought down supplies from town: flour, beans, salt, kerosene, bandages, extra blankets from Maggie Doyle, who gave them without asking questions until the third trip. She stood behind the post office counter while Tom folded 2 wool throws into his pack. "You expecting company?" she asked. Tom tied the pack closed. "Maybe. In winter?" He looked toward the front window. Outside, Coldwater Pass moved calmly under a pale sky. A boy pushed a shovel along the sidewalk. Dale Mercer's foreman loaded feed sacks into a truck. Mayor Briggs crossed the street with papers tucked under his arm. Tom lowered his voice. "Have you seen the crows?" Maggie's eyes shifted. "What about them? They left the south fence line 2 weeks early." She did not smile. "That matters?" "It might." Maggie leaned one hand on the counter. "Tom, if you're seeing something, Say it plain." He looked at the old brass mailboxes behind her. Each one had a name, a family, a door, a stove, a roof. People who still believed winter was something that happened outside until it didn't. "Something big is building west of the Bitterroots," he said. "Not tomorrow, maybe, but soon." Maggie studied him. Others might have heard drama in the words. She heard numbers not yet spoken. "What do you need?" she asked. Tom was quiet a moment. "If folks ask why I'm buying extra, tell them I'm old and strange. That won't be hard." The corner of his mouth moved. Then a crash sounded outside. A delivery dolly tipped off the post office step, metal handle striking concrete with a ringing bang. Tom's hand shot to the counter edge, his knees bent before he could stop them. His eyes snapped to the window, then the door, then the reflection in the glass behind Maggie. Maggie saw all of it. So did Major. The shepherd moved fast, cutting between Tom and the door, not as if facing an enemy, but as if blocking the road back into memory. He pressed his body against Tom's shin and leaned. Tom looked down. Major looked up. The moment held. Then Tom straightened slowly. Maggie did not say, "Are you all right?" She did not say, "It was just a dolly." She picked up the blankets and set them closer to him. "I'll keep an eye on the crows," she said. Tom nodded once. By the first week of January, Major no longer slept beside the stove. He slept by the door. Some nights he did not sleep at all. Tom would wake in the chair and find the dog standing at the threshold, nose nearly touching the crack beneath the door, breathing in whatever the mountain carried. Twice Major scratched until Tom opened it. Both times the dog stepped out, crossed the porch, and stared west under a sky too still for comfort. The ledger filled with entries. Pressure falling. Wind shift. West-southwest. Major alert again, 0310. Snow loading inconsistent. No deer tracks below East Draw. By then, Tom had stopped wondering whether the dog sensed something real. The question was whether anyone else would listen before the weather made listening useless. On the morning of January 17th, Major refused to come inside. The air was pale and motionless. No snow fell. No wind moved through the pines. Coldwater Pass sat below them under a clean winter sun, innocent as a postcard. Major stood on the outer stone ledge with his head high, eyes fixed beyond the western peaks. Tom came out carrying his coffee. The dog gave one low sound. Not loud, not panicked. Certain. Tom looked west. At first he saw only blue sky. Then, low along the far horizon, a narrow gray shelf moved behind the mountains. Not clouds drifting, not fog. A front. Dense, flat, and wrong. Tom set the coffee down untouched. Inside the cabin, he opened the ledger to a fresh page. His pencil hovered only a second. Then he wrote one line. Storm probable, severe, worn town today. Major finally came inside, but he did not go to the stove. He sat by the door, facing outward, waiting. Tom rode down to Coldwater Pass before noon. The road from Wolfpine Ridge was frozen hard in the shaded cuts and slick where the sun touched it. His old pickup moved slow, chains clinking under the tires. Major sat upright in the passenger seat, nose angled toward the cracked window, ears turning with every change in sound. Tom had packed the truck before leaving. 2 coils of rope, a shovel, a canvas bag with extra gloves, the green ledger. He did not know which thing he would need first. Coldwater Pass looked almost cheerful when he reached town. Sunlight flashed off store windows. Smoke lifted straight from chimneys. A few kids slid along an icy patch near the church steps, while their mothers called half-hearted warnings from the sidewalk. Nothing about the day looked like danger. That was the trouble. Danger rarely dressed for the part. Tom parked outside the town office and sat for a moment with both hands on the wheel. Across the street, Dale Mercer's truck was angled outside the diner. Ray Collins's white work van sat near the hardware store. Mayor Alan Briggs's office window glowed yellow above the bank. Major gave a low breath. Tom looked at him. Yeah. He took the ledger and stepped out. Inside the town office, the heat was turned too high. The room smelled of paper, coffee, and wet wool. Mayor Briggs stood behind his desk, signing something with a fountain pen. Dale Mercer leaned near the stove with one boot crossed over the other. Ray Collins sat in a chair by the wall, hat in his hands, waiting on a permit or an argument. Two other men stood nearby, talking about feed prices. The room quieted when Tom entered. Major stayed at his heel. Alan Briggs looked up. Tom. Tom set the ledger on the mayor's desk. A bad storm is building west of the Bitterroots. Dale turned from the stove with a grin already forming. It's January, Whitaker. That's generally when snow happens. Tom did not look at him. He opened the ledger to the last 4 pages. Pressure's been falling for 6 days. Wind direction's unstable. Snow loading is wrong on the western slopes. Crows cleared out early. Deer are moving low before the front hits. Mayor Briggs glanced at the pages but did not touch them. You came down here to report crows? No. I came down because roads will close fast when this comes in. Ray Collins shifted in his chair. Tom turned one page. Folks need wood close to their doors, chimneys cleared, water stored inside, livestock moved out of weak barns, rope lines between house and sheds if they have them. Anyone in low ground ought to know where they're going before dark. Dale laughed once. Listen to this. He's got the whole war plan. The word war touched the room in a way Dale did not notice. Tom's jaw moved, but he kept his voice even. Call it whatever you want. You hoping for a storm? Dale asked. That it? So everybody can say your rock house was a good idea? Major's head turned toward Dale. No growl, just attention. Dale saw it and lifted both hands in mock surrender. Easy, Major. I'm just asking. Tom closed the ledger halfway. I don't need anybody to say anything. Then why bring your little notebook? Tom looked at him then. His eyes were pale and steady. Because weather doesn't care what a man believes. For a moment, the only sound was the hiss of the radiator. Mayor Briggs removed his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. Tom, we appreciate caution. But if I send out a town alert every time a front moves through, people stop listening. The Weather Service hasn't issued anything beyond heavy snow. The Weather Service isn't standing on Wolfpine Ridge. No, Dale said, because they have sense. One of the men near the stove chuckled. Ray did not. Tom turned slightly toward him. You've built enough roofs to know what drifting can do. Ray looked down at his hat. I know what drifting can do. Then tell him. Ray's fingers tightened along the brim. I'm not saying Tom's wrong. Dale snorted. Ray looked up. I'm saying there's no way to know yet. That was worse than laughter. Tom held his gaze a second longer, then nodded as if a piece of equipment had failed inspection. Mayor Briggs closed the ledger gently and slid it back. I'll mention general winter precautions at the council meeting tonight. Tonight may be too late. The mayor's face hardened. Tom, I will not start a panic because you and your dog don't like the wind. Major moved one step forward. Tom touched 2 fingers to the dog's collar. Not a command. A reminder. Major sat. The office seemed smaller after that. Tom picked up the ledger. Then tell people to keep a path open to the North Road and to my ridge. Dale's smile vanished into open disbelief. Your ridge? If heat fails, they'll need somewhere to go. You really do think you're Moses with a wood stove? Tom turned toward the door. Dale's voice followed him. How many you planning to fit in that cave, Whitaker? 6? 8? Or just enough for folks to watch you be right? Tom stopped with his hand on the knob. A flash moved behind his eyes. Not a memory, exactly. A number. How many can fit in a bird meant for 9? How many stretchers can you load before the rotor wash buries the LZ? How many men can you save when the mountain takes 2 before you get there? His fingers tightened around the brass knob. Major stood beside him, shoulder touching his leg. Tom did not turn back. As many as come, he said. Then he walked out. The cold hit clean after the office heat. Tom crossed the sidewalk with Major tight at his side. His truck waited at the curb, but he did not climb in. Instead, he stood beside it and looked down Main Street. Coldwater Pass kept moving. A woman carried bakery bags to her car. A boy dragged a red sled over dirty snow. 2 ranch hands joked outside the feed store. A town could look alive and still be unprepared. Maggie Doyle saw him from the post office window. She came out without a coat, arms folded against the cold. They didn't listen. Tom looked at the western sky. No. How bad? He handed her the ledger. Maggie did not skim. She read the last page, then the one before it. Her lips pressed into a thin line. What do you want me to do? Nothing official. That's good. I'm not official. Write down today. What I said. Time I said it. Who was there? Maggie looked at him. Why? Tom watched a gray smear gathering above the far ridge. So faint most people would call it cloud shadow. Because later, people forget what they didn't want to hear. Maggie held the ledger against her chest. And the cabin? Tom turned toward the truck bed. Already set. What does that mean? He pulled back the tarp. Maggie saw folded blankets stacked inside. Extra lanterns. Flour sacks. 2 crates of canned peaches she had given him. Bandages in a coffee tin. A box of children's mittens tied with string. Her face changed. You weren't preparing for yourself. Tom retied the tarp. I live alone. Don't need 40 blankets. The wind moved down Main Street, lifting powder from the curb and carrying it in a thin white ribbon between them. Maggie looked at Major. The dog was facing west again. When should I worry? She asked. Tom opened the truck door. When he stops watching. Major did not stop. That evening, Maggie wrote in the back of the post office account book, beneath a column of stamp orders and parcel receipts. January 17th. Thomas Whitaker warned Mayor Briggs, Dale Mercer, Ray Collins, and others of a severe storm, advised wood, water, chimney clearing, rope lines, livestock shelter, and route to Wolf Pine Ridge. Major present. Dog alert behavior noted. She sanded the ink, closed the book, and slid it into the lower drawer. Outside, the sun went down behind the western peaks. By midnight, the wind had shifted. Up on Wolf Pine Ridge, Tom moved through the cabin by lantern light. He filled the last water jug, checked the stovepipe, packed kindling into a dry box, and laid extra wool blankets on the loft ladder. He moved like he was preparing an outpost before contact. Quiet, exact, no wasted motion. Major stood at the open door. Snow had not started yet. The air was too still. Tom stepped beside him and looked into the dark. Far below, Coldwater Pass glowed with warm windows and sleeping faith. Major's ears flattened. A sound came from the west, low and distant. Not thunder, not wind yet. Something like the mountain drawing one long breath. Tom closed the door and dropped the bar into place. Here it comes, he said. For nearly an hour, nothing happened. The cabin sat inside the granite hollow with the stove breathing low and steady, lantern light touching the rafters, shadows pressed into the corners. Tom moved through the room one last time, checking what he had already checked. Vent covers, water barrels, kindling box, spare mittens, rope coil, the green ledger on the table. Major did not leave the door. He sat facing it, shoulders squared, ears forward, as if the storm were not weather, but a visitor expected after dark. At 11:38 p.m., the first snow touched the window. One flake, then three, then a slow white drift crossing the glass. Tom wrote the time in the ledger. Snow began 23:38. Wind calm. By midnight, the calm had changed, not gradually. It broke. A gust slammed into the ridge so hard the lantern flame bent sideways inside its chimney. Snow hit the cabin wall like thrown gravel. The stovepipe groaned once, deep in the metal, then settled. Somewhere above the granite overhang, wind tore across the stone lip and screamed into the dark. Major rose. Tom looked at the thermometer. 62. He opened the stove, added one split log, and closed it before the flame could leap too high. Heat was not something to waste, not in a long storm. He had learned that in places where supply trucks came late and men got quiet when fuel cans ran low. Outside, the world vanished piece by piece. The moon disappeared first, then the lower trail, then the pine line. By 1 a.m., the window no longer showed night. It showed white motion, endless and violent, racing sideways past the glass. Snow did not fall. It attacked. Down in Coldwater Pass, the first power line snapped behind the feed store at 1:17. It went with a flash blue enough to wake 3 houses. Then the east side of town went dark. A minute later, the rest followed. In the grocery store apartment, Lenny Carter stumbled out of bed and found his kitchen already colder near the floor. At the schoolhouse, the emergency lights blinked twice and died. In Dale Mercer's main barn, cattle shifted uneasily as wind forced powder through cracks in the siding and laid white stripes across the straw. By dawn, the roads were gone. Not blocked. Gone. Main Street had become a long, soft trench between buried storefronts. Trucks sat as round white shapes along the curb. The church steps disappeared under a drift that reached the handrail. Chimneys smoked when they could, but the smoke came out low and torn apart, pushed back by wind before it rose. Mayor Allen Briggs woke to his wife shaking his shoulder. "The power's out." He told her he knew. Then the bedroom window cracked from one corner to the other with a sound like ice breaking on a pond. Up on Wolfpine Ridge, Tom made coffee by lantern light. Outside temperature, -8. Inside, 64. Wind severe. Visibility near 0. Would use normal. He wrote without hurrying. Major lay near the door now, not asleep, not fully awake. His eyes opened each time the wind changed pitch. His ears moved toward sounds Tom could barely separate from the storm. At mid-morning, Tom tied a rope around his waist and clipped it to the inside anchor before opening the door. The storm tried to come in whole. Snow swirled across the threshold. Cold bit his face. The rope line outside vanished 3 feet from the porch, but his glove found it by feel. He stepped only far enough to check the wood stack cover and the animal shelter line. The granite hollow took the worst of the wind off him. Beyond it, whiteout roared past like a river. He came back in with frost on his eyebrows. Major sniffed his coat, then returned to the door. "Not yet," Tom said. The dog gave no sign of agreement. By the second day, Coldwater Pass began making bad choices because good ones were no longer easy. People burned through wood too fast, trying to keep rooms warm that were never built to hold heat in a wind like that. Men dug tunnels to sheds and came back shaking. Doors froze at the bottom. Smoke backed down 2 chimneys before noon. The phone lines failed. Then cell service flickered and vanished. At Dale Mercer's ranch, a drift climbed the west side of the cattle barn until it reached the lower roof edge. The barn had stood 30 years and looked strong from the road, but the wind packed snow under the eaves and across the roof faster than the hands could clear it. Inside, a beam gave a dull pop. Dale looked up. Another pop followed. He ordered the men out before the roof dropped. They made it through the side door just as the center beam split, and one corner of the barn sank with a long wooden moan. No one spoke after. Even Dale stood in the snow, hat gone, staring at the place where confidence had been 10 minutes before. On Wolf Pine Ridge, the cabin held. Tom did not smile about it. He checked the north wall with bare fingers twice a day, touching the boards where frost had once formed. Dry. He checked the vents with the flashlight, watching the thin movement of air near the covers. He logged temperature changes. He rationed wood by the hour. He ate beans standing at the stove and slept in short pieces in the chair. Major stayed near the door. Sometimes he lifted his head and looked at Tom. Sometimes he stood and pressed his nose to the lower crack, as if reading the storm from scent alone. On the third night, a sound woke Tom before Major moved. A deep thump. Then another. Not at the door. Outside somewhere, below the hollow, something heavy had shifted in the snow. Tom was upright before his eyes were fully open. Major stood stiff, head low, ears pinned toward the trail. Tom listened. Wind. Stone. Snow. Then nothing. He crossed to the table and marked the time. Possible slide below ridge. 03:15. His hand paused over the page. Below ridge meant the route from town might already be harder than he had planned. He went to the door, placed one palm against the wood, and felt the vibration of the storm through it. No one yet. By the morning of the fourth day, Coldwater Pass had changed from a town into a collection of trapped rooms. Families moved into kitchens and shut off the rest of their houses with quilts and nailed blankets. Old people sat close to stoves with coats on. Children stopped asking when the lights would return. Water froze in pipes along outside walls. The sound of shoveling became constant wherever there was still strength to shovel. At Ray Collins's house, smoke began to creep sideways from the stovepipe joint. Ray noticed the smell first. Not strong. Wrong. He opened the damper, checked the stove, then looked toward the ceiling where the pipe passed into the upper room. His grandson Evan sat at the kitchen table, wrapped in a blanket, drawing lines in condensation on the window. "Stay here," Ray said. He climbed the stairs with a flashlight. Halfway up, he heard the stove cough, not crackle. Cough. By the time he reached the attic access, smoke was thick enough to sting his eyes. Ice had formed around the chimney cap outside, forcing the draft back down. Ray had seen it before in bad weather. He had never seen it happen this fast. He tried to clear it from inside. The wind drove more smoke down. He came back coughing. Evan was standing now, eyes wide. "Grandpa?" Ray grabbed his coat. The front door would not open. Snow had packed against it to the knob. He went to the back. Same. The windows had frozen tight at the bottom. Ray coughed into his sleeve, then picked up a chair and broke the kitchen window. Cold exploded in. So did snow. He wrapped Evan in 2 coats, tied a scarf over the boy's mouth, and helped him through the broken frame into a world without edges. They followed the fence line because there was nothing else. Ray knew enough not to aim for town. Town was lower, farther, and filling with the same storm that had already beaten his house. So he aimed toward the thing he had doubted. The cabin, the rock hollow. Tom Whitaker's impossible place. Halfway up the ridge, Evan fell. Ray hauled him upright. The boy's lips had gone pale. His lashes were crusted white. Twice, Ray thought he had lost the fence line until his gloved hand found wire again under rime ice. At the lower gate, one of Tom's reflective stakes flashed weakly in the storm. Ray stared at it. A strip of metal nailed to pine. A thing he had once thought foolish. It looked like mercy. He pulled Evan toward it. Stake by stake, they climbed. Inside the cabin, Tom stood from the table before the knock came. Major was already at the door, body rigid. This time the sound came again, faint, almost swallowed. 3 dull strikes against wood. Tom grabbed the lantern with one hand and the door bar with the other. Major gave one sharp bark, not warning, direction. Tom lifted the bar. The door opened inward against a wall of wind and snow. Ray Collins fell through first, dropping to one knee, one arm locked around Evan. The boy sagged against him, small inside too many coats, face white except for the raw red around his eyes. For 1 second, Ray looked up at Tom from the floor. The man who had warned about wet walls, the man who had refused to believe, the man whose own house had just failed him. Tom did not mention any of it. He turned his head and spoke the way he had spoken in storms, in dust, under rotors, and beside men who needed orders more than comfort. Blanket. Boots off. Warm water. Slow. Major moved before anyone else. He went straight to the boy, lowered himself against Evan's side, and pressed his warm body close while Tom shut the door against the storm. Outside, the blizzard kept trying to erase the mountain. Inside, the cabin made room for the first of them. Ray Collins could not stop coughing. He sat on the floor, just inside Tom's cabin, with his back against the wall, one hand clamped around a tin cup of warm water he had not yet managed to drink. Snow melted from his coat and ran in small dark lines across the boards. His face had the hollow look of a man who had spent the last hour bargaining with weather and knew he had almost lost. Evan lay on a folded blanket near the stove. The boy was 14, but in that moment he looked much younger. His boots were off. His socks hung stiff with ice near the hearth. Tom had wrapped his feet in dry wool and placed another blanket over his shoulders. Major lay pressed along Evan's side, one heavy paw stretched across the boy's coat sleeve, his body giving steady warmth without being asked. "Don't rub his hands," Tom said. Ray's fingers froze in midair. Tom knelt beside Evan with a lantern close to the floor. Slow warming. Let the blood come back easy. Ray swallowed, throat raw. "I know." Tom glanced at him. Ray lowered his eyes. "Thought I knew." The stove cracked softly. For several minutes, the room held only small sounds. Evan's shallow breathing, the hiss of snow against the window, Major's quiet exhale against the boy's coat. Tom moved with the calm precision of a medic in a bad place, checking skin, pulse, breath, eyes. He did not rush. He did not speak more than he had to. "Evan," Tom said. The boy's eyelids fluttered. "Stay with me." "What's your full name?" Evan's lips moved. No sound came. Tom touched the boy's shoulder. "Try again." "Evan." "Collins." "Good." "Where are you?" The boy blinked slowly. His eyes moved to the rafters, then the stove, then Major's face inches from his own. "Dog," he whispered. Tom nodded. "Close enough." Ray covered his mouth with one hand and looked away. The old builder's coat steamed in the warmth. His hair was white with melted frost. The man who had walked through Tom's unfinished cabin months earlier, judging vents and wall gaps, now sat beneath those same walls, too tired to lift his head for long. Tom rose and crossed to the table. He opened the ledger. Day 4. Ray Collins and Evan arrived approximately 04:15. Exposure: chimney failure at Collins' house. Trail markers visible enough for navigation. His pencil paused. He added one more line. Cabin occupancy, 4 people. Major stable. Wood use increase expected. Ray watched him write. You keep records of everything? Tom closed the ledger. Things get confused after. Ray gave a bitter little breath. Not this. Tom looked at him. Ray's voice dropped. I said this place would fail. Tom added another small log to the stove. You said the wall would trap moisture. I said more than that. Yes. Ray stared into the orange glow. My house filled with smoke in 10 minutes. Tom checked the damper, then set the kettle closer to heat. Ice cap. Ray nodded. Couldn't clear it. Wind kept forcing smoke down. Doors buried. Had to break the kitchen window. Evan shifted under the blanket. Major lifted his head at once, then settled when the boy's breathing steadied. Ray looked at the dog. He knows what he's doing. He usually does. A knock came again. Not from the door. From somewhere beyond the cabin walls, outside in the hollow. Tom straightened. Major rose so quickly the blanket edge slipped from Evan's shoulder. This time the dog did bark. Once, hard, toward the entrance. Tom grabbed the lantern and the rope hanging by the door. Stay with him. Ray tried to stand. His legs failed under him. Tom did not wait. He opened the inner door and stepped into the stone hollow. The storm hit harder outside the cabin, though the granite overhang broke the worst of it. Snow flew through the entrance in wild sheets. The outer rope line disappeared into white beyond arm's reach. Major pushed past Tom and moved low, nose down, body angled into the wind. Easy, Tom called. The dog stopped, listened, then barked again toward the lower path. Tom clipped the rope to his belt and followed. 3 shapes emerged from the white. First, a woman, bent nearly double, one arm wrapped around a smaller figure. Behind her, an older man stumbled with both hands on the guide rope, face wrapped in a scarf crusted solid at the edges. They fell into the granite hollow together, not yet at the cabin, not yet warm, but no longer fully in the storm. Tom knew the woman after 2 steps. Maggie Doyle. Her cheeks were raw from cold, her eyelashes white, one glove missing. Under her arm was little Annie Keller, 7 years old, wrapped in a coat too large for her and crying without sound. The old man was Luis Ortega, who lived alone behind the church. Tom took Annie first. Maggie tried to speak and coughed instead. Inside, Tom said. Major moved beside Luis, pressing against the man's knee when he swayed. The old ranch hand looked down at the shepherd through ice-crusted brows as if he had been guided by a ghost. They reached the cabin in a line of rope, lantern, dog, and bodies. Ray looked up as the door opened. His eyes changed when he saw Maggie. She saw him too, sitting on the floor, humbled and half-frozen. Neither said a word. There was no room for pride in the cabin now. Pride needed space. Survival took all of it. Tom turned the room into order. Annie near the stove, but not too close. Luis in the chair. Maggie's glove off, hand checked for frostbite. Ray given the job of holding the cup to Evan's lips. Small sips, Tom said. Ray nodded and obeyed. Maggie sat on the edge of the bed, shaking so hard the frame tapped against the wall. Major came to her after Annie settled. He pressed his head beneath her bare hand. She curled her fingers into his fur and shut her eyes. I told them, she whispered. Tom looked up from wrapping Luis's hand. Maggie opened her eyes. At the post office, after you left. I told Mrs. Keller to move her wood inside. Told Luis to sleep at the church if his stove acted up. They thought I was fussing. Annie whimpered softly. Maggie's face folded for 1 second. Then she caught herself. Her mother pushed her through the pantry window. Said the back roof was starting to go. Tom's hands stopped only briefly. Mother, Maggie swallowed. Still there. With her husband. Ray closed his eyes. The storm struck the cabin wall with a long, grinding force. Snow hissed along the seams, but no draft entered. The lantern flame stood steady. Tom looked toward the door. Major was already looking. Ray saw the look pass between man and dog. "You're not going back out," Ray said, voice rough. Tom tied off the bandage around Luis's hand. "Not for your permission." Ray struggled to rise again. "I'm coming. You can't stand." "That's not your call." Tom turned to him, and for the first time since Ray arrived, something hard entered his face. "It is in this cabin." Ray froze. Tom's voice stayed low. "You stay. You keep that boy awake. You watch the stove. Maggie logs names if more come." Luis stays off his feet. Maggie reached for the ledger before he had to point. Tom pulled on his outer coat. Major stepped into the harness without command. Annie lifted her head from the blanket. Her small face was pale and wet. "My mom," she whispered. Tom crouched beside her. For a second, the storm, the cabin, Ray, Maggie, all of it fell away. He saw another young face under another hard sky, heard a corporal asking for something Tom could not give back. Major nudged his shoulder. Tom blinked once. Then he placed a dry mitten gently over Annie's fingers. "I'm going to follow the line," he said. "Major's going to follow what the storm missed." Annie looked at the dog. Major stood still, steady as timber. Tom rose, lifted the lantern, and opened the door again. The wind came for him like a living thing. He stepped into it anyway. Major went first. The world beyond the door had no up or down. Snow came sideways, then upward, then spun in circles inside the beam of Tom's lantern until the light itself seemed to break apart. The rope at his waist pulled tight against the anchor line. His boots found the path only by memory and pressure. One step. Brace. Feel the line. One step. Brace again. Major moved low ahead of him, almost belly to the snow, black back vanishing and reappearing in the white. Tom trusted the rope. He trusted the stakes. He trusted the dog more. The descent toward the Keller place should have taken 12 minutes. It took nearly 40. Twice Tom dropped to one knee when the wind shoved him sideways. Once he stopped because the shape in front of him looked like a fence post, then realized it was the broken top of a young pine bent under ice. Major did not hesitate. The shepherd cut left before the old pasture line, nose working under the blast. He stopped beside a drift so smooth it looked untouched and began digging hard. Tom lowered the lantern. At first, there was nothing. Then a strip of red cloth appeared beneath the snow. A scarf. Tom dropped beside Major and dug with both gloved hands. The snow was packed wet and heavy near the bottom. He hit wood, then glass, then the edge of a window frame half buried under a collapsed pantry roof. A voice came from inside, faint. "Annie?" Tom leaned close to the broken gap. "She's alive. She's warm. Can you move?" A woman sobbed once, quick and raw, then caught herself. Mr. Keller had a bruised shoulder. Mrs. Keller had blood on her forehead from falling shelves, but both could crawl. Tom cleared the window enough to pull them through one at a time. Major stood between them and the wind, body angled like a shield while Tom looped rope around their waists. They moved back by touch. No talking unless needed. No wasted breath. At the lower ridge stake, Mr. Keller slipped and nearly pulled all of them down. Tom dropped flat, drove his elbow into the snow crust, and locked the rope across his forearm. Major lunged, grabbed the man's coat sleeve in his teeth, and held until Keller found his knees again. When the cabin door finally opened, Annie screamed for her mother. The sound broke something in the room. Maggie turned away, one hand over her mouth. Ray wiped his eyes with his sleeve and pretended he was clearing smoke. Luis whispered something in Spanish and crossed himself. Tom shut the door, barred it, and stood still for 1 second, snow falling from his shoulders. Major shook once, then went straight back to the door. Not to the stove, not to rest. The room watched him. Tom saw it then. The same thing he had seen in staging areas overseas when the first wounded came in and everyone understood the night was not over. The cabin was no longer a home. It was an LZ, a place people reached because the rest of the map had failed. By afternoon, more came. First, the Parkers from the edge of town, following the reflective stakes with 2 children wrapped inside a quilt between them. Then Mrs. Hanley and her brother, both gray-faced from cold. Then Mayor Alan Briggs himself, one lens of his glasses cracked, coat torn at the cuff, his polished voice gone somewhere under the storm. He stepped inside and looked at Tom as if he had climbed into an answer he did not want. Tom pointed toward the wall. "Sit there. Boots off." "Maggie, name and condition." The mayor opened his mouth. Tom was already turning away. Maggie took the ledger without looking up. "Name?" "Alan Briggs." "Condition?" The mayor stared at her. She lifted her pencil. "Condition, Alan." He looked down at his shaking hands. "Cold. That's a start." By dusk, the cabin and stone hollow held 37 people. Tom divided space with rope and chalk marks. Children near the stove, elderly along the inner wall, wet gear outside the sleeping area, wood rationed in 2-hour loads. No one opened the door alone. Anyone going to the animal shelter clipped to the line. Anyone coughing sat near the vent, not the stove. He gave orders without raising his voice. People obeyed. Not because they liked being told what to do, because the old man they had mocked now sounded like the only person in the storm who had expected them. Major moved constantly. He checked children, sniffed at gloves, stood over the door whenever someone new approached. When a little boy started crying for his cat, Major pressed his head into the child's chest until the boy wrapped both arms around his neck and went quiet. Sometime near midnight, the wind dropped for almost 3 minutes. The silence startled everyone more than the noise had. Then, through that brief hollow, Major lifted his head. His ears locked toward the lower barns. Tom saw it and went still. "What?" Ray asked. Major gave a sharp bark, then another. Tom grabbed the lantern. "Who's missing?" No one answered at first. Then Mrs. Parker sat up. "Lily Ward. She was at the Hanley barn when the storm hit. 8 years old. Red coat." The room changed. Tom reached for the rope. Ray stood this time and stayed standing. "I can go." Tom looked at his legs. They held. "Then you hold the line," Tom said. Major was already at the door. They found Lily by sound and scent, not sight. The Hanley barn had lost half its roof, and snow filled the stalls like poured flour. Major clawed at a drift beside the tack room, barking until Tom heard the tiny thud beneath it. A boot, then a mitten, then a red sleeve. Lily was wedged between a feed bin and a fallen plank, conscious but too cold to cry. Tom lifted the timber while Ray pulled her free. Major shoved his body against her face, licking ice from her cheek until she blinked. "Clear," Tom said, though his voice caught on the word. Ray heard it. He said nothing. They had nearly reached the ridge again when the barn behind them gave up the rest of its roof. The crack came sharp and sudden. Major turned first. He leapt toward Tom and slammed into his hip just as a torn sheet of metal roofing skidded out of the white, spinning low across the snow. It missed Tom's legs by inches, struck Major across the hindquarter, and knocked the dog sideways into the drift. "Major!" Tom dropped beside him. For one breath, the dog did not rise. The storm roared over them. Ray held Lily under one arm and the rope in the other, eyes wide above his scarf. Then Major pushed up on his front legs. His back right leg trembled beneath him and folded. Tom's gloved hand hovered over the dog's side. Major looked at him through snow-crusted lashes. Then, impossibly, he stood. Not well, not clean, but standing. Tom swallowed once, hard. "Home," he said. Major limped forward into the white, and every person waiting inside the mountain saw the old German shepherd come through the door, with blood darkening the fur along his back leg, still carrying the storm on his coat, still trying to turn around and go back out. Tom caught Major by the harness before the dog could reach the door again. "No," he said. Major pulled once. Not hard. Enough to make the leather creak. The room had gone silent. Lily Ward was wrapped in 2 blankets near the stove, her red coat hanging stiff on a peg. Ray Collins stood beside her, breathing hard, snow melting down his sleeves. Maggie had a hand pressed over her mouth. Mayor Briggs stared at Major's leg, his cracked glasses fogged white along one side. Tom knelt slowly. Major's back right leg trembled under him. A strip of roofing metal had opened the skin along the thigh. Not deep enough to take the leg, deep enough to bleed. The fur around it was dark and wet. Tom took one look and reached for the medical tin beneath the shelf. "Ray," he said, "hold his shoulders." Ray moved without hesitation. Major looked at him, but did not growl. That alone told Tom how much pain the dog was carrying. Tom cut away a patch of fur with small scissors, cleaned the wound with warm water, then pressed gauze against it. Major's jaws opened slightly. His breath came fast through his teeth. He did not snap. He did not whine. When the antiseptic touched the cut, his front paws dug into the floorboards, and every child in the room seemed to hold their breath with him. Tom wrapped the bandage tight, but not too tight. His hands stayed steady until the last knot. Then his fingers paused against Major's leg. For 1 second, Tom saw Cooper in the snow again. Saw a still body where there should have been movement. Saw himself kneeling too late. Major turned his head and pushed his muzzle against Tom's wrist. The cabin returned. The stove, the people, the living dog under his hands. Tom swallowed and tied the knot. "Down," he said softly. Major lowered himself near the stove, but his eyes stayed on the door. Outside, the storm had entered its 5th day. Nobody called it weather anymore. Weather changed. This only pressed. The cabin in Stone Hollow now sheltered more than 50 people. Some lay shoulder to shoulder in blankets. Others sat against food sacks or tool crates, cups of thin soup between their hands. The granite walls caught lantern light and gave it back in soft amber. Beyond the entrance, the world had no edges. Tom moved among them with the ledger tucked under one arm. Names, conditions, fuel, water, children, elderly, injuries. He marked each thing because unmarked things got lost. He had learned that overseas, too. In chaos, a list was not paperwork. It was a rope tied around the mind. Near evening, the wind shifted again. The cabin trembled, not from weakness, from impact. A distant groan rolled up from the valley, long and wooden. People lifted their heads. Someone whispered a prayer. Tom stood still near the stove and listened until the sound faded. "Barn," Ray said. Tom nodded once. Major raised his head. Tom looked down. "Stay." The dog's ears moved forward. "Stay," Tom repeated, lower. Major did not lie back down. Minutes passed. Then came another sound. Not loud. A small metallic tapping beneath the storm. Tin against tin. 3 faint strikes. Then nothing. No one else seemed to hear it at first. Tom did. Major did. The dog struggled to his feet. His injured leg shook and nearly folded, but he caught himself. He took one limping step toward the door, then another. A low growl rose from his chest, aimed not at anyone inside, but at the white dark beyond the wall. Tom closed his eyes for half a beat. No. Major barked. It was not disobedience. It was information. Maggie stood from the table. What is it? Tom crossed to the door and pressed his ear near the seam. For a moment, only wind. Then, faint under it, metal tapped again, far away. Irregular, like something loose striking in the gusts, or someone too weak to hit hard. Dale Mercer pushed forward from near the back of the hollow. He had arrived that morning without his hat, his face gray with exhaustion, saying only that his ranch hands were safe in the machine shed, and his wife had stayed at the house to gather medicine for a neighbor's child. He had not spoken much since, now his eyes fixed on Tom. What direction? Tom looked at Major. The dog faced southeast, toward Dale's ranch line. Dale's face changed. My house, he said. The room seemed to shrink around him. My wife is there. Tom reached for the rope. Ray caught his arm. Tom, that dog can't go. Major limped to the door and stood with his nose against the crack. Tom looked at the bandaged leg. Blood had already marked the outer wrap. Ray's voice dropped. You can't ask that of him. I'm not asking. Major barked again, sharper. Tom took the harness from the peg. Maggie stepped in front of him. Then don't let him. Tom's hands closed around the leather. For a second, he did not move. The storm roared over the granite. The lanterns flickered. Somewhere near the stove, a child sniffed quietly. Dale Mercer stood barefoot in borrowed socks, a man stripped of every joke he had ever told. Tom looked down at Major. The dog looked back. There was no fear in those brown eyes, only the old steady answer he had given since the first day at the feed mill. Your call. Tom crouched and pressed his forehead once against Major's. Slow, he said. You hear me? Slow. Major stood still while Tom clipped the harness. They went out with 3 men on the line. Tom in front, Ray behind him, Dale at the rear because nothing short of rope would have kept him inside. Major led, limping but certain. Each step left one dark mark on the snow before the storm erased it. The route to Dale's place cut lower than Tom liked, too open, too much wind. Visibility dropped to the length of Tom's arm. He moved low, knees bent, one glove on the rope, the other holding the lantern close to his thigh to protect the flame. Old language moved through his head without permission. AO unstable. Visibility 0. Maintain contact. No gaps. Major stopped twice to reorient. Once he turned them away from a drift that looked solid until Ray drove a pole into it and found empty space beneath. Another time he froze before a downed wire hidden under snow, the faint black line barely visible under ice. Dale saw it and made a strangled sound. Nobody spoke. At the Mercer Ranch, the house was half buried. The front porch had collapsed under snow, blocking the main door. The mudroom roof had caved inward, and a loose piece of gutter tapped against a broken window frame. Tin against tin. Tom pointed. There. Dale lunged. Ray grabbed him by the coat. Wait. Tom moved first. He cleared enough snow from the mudroom window to look inside. His lantern showed broken shelves, spilled boots, a fallen beam, and 2 figures wedged against the far wall. Dale's wife, Carol Mercer. Beside her, a small boy wrapped in a horse blanket. Not their child. One of the neighbors. Carol lifted her head when the light touched her face. Dale made a sound that was almost her name and almost a sob. Tom checked the frame, then the beam. Ray. Ray understood. Together they wedged a broken porch rail under the beam and lifted just enough for Dale to crawl halfway through and pull the boy out. Tom took the child and passed him back along the rope. Carol came next, slower, one arm held close to her ribs. The house groaned above them. Major barked once. Tom turned. A shelf of snow slid from the roof where the porch had failed. It came down heavy and fast. Major threw himself against Tom's legs, knocking him sideways as the snow crashed where he had been standing. The lantern went out. For 3 seconds, there was no light, only wind. Breathing, someone shouting Dale's name. Tom lay on his side in snow up to his shoulder, Major half across his knees. He found the dog's collar by touch. Major. The dog moved. Barely. Ray's flashlight cut through the white. Major pushed himself up with his front legs. His injured back leg did not follow at first. Then it dragged. Then it held. Tom did not trust his voice. He got one arm beneath the dog's chest and helped him stand. They returned to the cabin slower than they had left. Dale carried the boy. Ray supported Carol. Tom kept one hand on Major's harness the entire way, feeling every stumble through the leather. When they reached the granite hollow, people pulled them inside without words. Carol Mercer collapsed into blankets near the stove. Dale fell beside her and held her hand with both of his. The neighbor child coughed once, then began to cry, and the sound filled the room like proof. Major made it 3 steps inside. Then his legs folded. Tom dropped with him. The dog lay on his side, chest moving hard, muzzle crusted white, eyes still open toward the door. Tom put both hands on him. "Clear," he whispered, though no one had asked. Major's tail moved once against the floor. Then the old shepherd finally closed his eyes. For a moment, no one in the cabin moved. The storm still beat against the granite hollow. Snow still hissed along the threshold. The stove still burned with the same low orange glow that had carried them through 5 days of white darkness. But every eye in the room had fallen to the old German shepherd lying on the floorboards. His bandaged legs stretched awkwardly behind him, his muzzle crusted with ice. Tom kept both hands on Major's ribs. They rose, fell, rose again. Only then did Tom breathe. "He's alive," Maggie whispered. The words moved through the room like warmth. Dale Mercer lowered his head until his forehead touched his wife's hand. Ray Collins sat back against the wall and covered his eyes. Mayor Briggs looked down at his boots as if he had found something there he could not face. Tom did not look at any of them. He reached for another blanket and tucked it around Major's shoulders. The dog did not wake. His breathing stayed deep and rough, but steady. Tom sat beside him through the last hours of the storm, one hand resting lightly behind Major's ear, the other still close enough to feel the rise and fall. No one asked him to move. Near dawn, the wind changed. It did not stop all at once. It loosened. The scream faded into a moan, then into a long, tired whisper sliding over the ridge. For the first time in days, the lantern flame stood perfectly straight. People noticed in silence. Tom lifted his head. Major's ear twitched beneath his fingers. Outside, the world had gone still. Tom stood slowly, joints stiff, face gray with exhaustion. He crossed to the door and lifted the bar. When he opened it, cold poured in, but no snow followed. The storm had spent itself. Beyond the granite hollow, Coldwater Pass lay buried beneath a white ocean. Fences were gone. Roads were gone. Trucks had become rounded humps under snow. Barn roofs sat broken in places like cracked ribs. The church steeple rose from the valley, as if from a frozen sea. Smoke came from only a few chimneys. One by one, people stepped out behind Tom. No one spoke. The town they had trusted looked smaller now. The ridge they had mocked stood above it, scarred by wind but still there. Search teams formed before breakfast. Tom tried to go, but Ray Collins put a hand on his shoulder. "Stay with your dog," Ray said. Tom looked at him. Ray's hand did not move. "We can follow the stakes now," he said. "You taught us." So they went without him. Ray led one group down toward the schoolhouse. Dale went with another toward the ranch road, limping through snow with a shovel across his shoulder. Mayor Briggs carried rope and did not once give an order until Maggie told him where to stand. Men and women who had barely spoken to each other before the storm moved through the valley in lines, digging, calling names, clearing doors, checking houses. By afternoon, the count became clear. Many buildings had failed. Livestock had been lost. Homes would need rebuilding. But more than 50 people had survived because they had reached Wolfpine Ridge, because the cabin held, because Major had heard what men had missed, because Tom Whitaker had prepared for people who had laughed at him. 3 days later, when the roads were opened by county plows and the first emergency trucks reached Coldwater Pass, the story had already changed shape. It no longer sounded like a joke. It sounded like a thing people lowered their voices to tell. The veterans' cabin had stayed warm. The dog had found the missing. The old man had warned them first. Maggie made sure of that last part. On the first clear morning after the blizzard, she unlocked the post office drawer and carried out the account book. She laid it on the counter in front of Mayor Briggs, Ray Collins, Dale Mercer, and half the town. Her finger rested on the entry dated January 17th. She read it aloud. Not dramatically, not accusing, just clearly. Thomas Whitaker warned Mayor Briggs, Dale Mercer, Ray Collins, and others of a severe storm. Advised wood, water, chimney clearing, rope lines, livestock shelter, and route to Wolfpine Ridge. Major present. Dog alert behavior noted. The room stayed quiet after she finished. Then Tom placed his green ledger beside it. Pages upon pages of numbers followed. Temperatures, wind shifts, pressure readings, wood use, moisture repairs, arrival times, names, conditions. The cabin had held between 64 and 66 degrees through the worst of the storm. The north wall had stayed dry. The stove had used less wood than most families burned in 2 days. Ray read the pages longer than anyone. When he closed the book, he did not look at the mayor. He looked at Tom. "Would you let me measure it?" he asked. "All of it. The wall gaps, the vents, the floor height, the way you set it into the hollow." Tom said nothing for a moment. Then Major, lying on a blanket near the stove, lifted his head and gave one tired breath. Tom looked down at him and nodded. "Ask him," he said. A small laugh moved through the room, quiet and broken, but real. Dale Mercer came last. He waited until most people had gone. He stood in the doorway of the post office with his hat in both hands, turning the brim slowly. The man who had filled rooms with laughter now seemed unsure how to enter one. Tom was sitting near the window, Major's head resting across his boot. Dale stepped forward. "I came to say something," he said. Tom looked up. Dale swallowed. His eyes went to Major's bandaged leg, then to the floor. "My wife is alive because of your dog." Tom did not answer. "My wife," Dale repeated, voice rougher. "And that boy." Major watched him without lifting his head. Dale removed his hat fully and held it against his chest. "I was wrong about the ridge. Wrong about the cabin." He paused. "Wrong about you." The words did not fix every cruel laugh. They did not return the years Tom had spent being measured by what people thought they saw. But they landed. Tom rested one hand on Major's shoulder. "Winter corrected a lot of men," he said. Dale nodded once, unable to meet his eyes. Spring came slowly to Coldwater Pass. Snow pulled back from the roads first, then from the fence posts, then from the dark scars where barns had collapsed. Meltwater ran in silver lines through the fields. Hammers began sounding across the valley. Ray Collins spent whole afternoons on Wolfpine Ridge with a tape measure, notebook, and questions he now asked with care. New wood shelters went up closer to slopes and tree breaks. Chimneys were rebuilt with better caps. Rope anchors appeared beside back doors. Families moved wood stacks under cover and closer to their kitchens. No one copied Tom's cabin exactly. They could not. The granite hollow belonged to the mountain, but they copied the thinking. Watch the wind. Respect the snow. Build with the land, not against it. On the first warm Sunday of May, the town climbed Wolfpine Ridge together. Tom had not asked them to. He stood near the cabin door in his old field jacket while Major lay on a thick blanket in the sun. The dog was healing, though the limp stayed. Gray had spread around his eyes and muzzle, but his ears still lifted whenever the wind changed. Mayor Briggs cleared his throat near the stone path. Beside him stood a small bronze plaque mounted on a cedar post. No ribbon, no band, no speech long enough to ruin it. Maggie read the inscription. He listened to the mountain. Major found it first. The words sat in the air. Simple. True. Tom looked away before anyone could study his face too closely. Major thumped his tail once against the blanket. Annie Keller, wearing a red scarf over her spring coat, walked up and placed one hand gently on the dog's head. Major closed his eyes and leaned into it. Below them, Coldwater Pass stretched across the valley, battered but alive. Smoke rose from new chimneys. Men repaired fences. Children chased each other along streets that had once disappeared. The town looked different now, not because every building had changed, but because the people had. They looked up more often. They watched the ridges. They listened when the wind sounded wrong. Years later, folks would still tell the story of the 5-day blizzard. Some would make it bigger than it was. Some would swear the light on Wolfpine Ridge could be seen from 20 miles away. Some would say Major dragged men out of the snow by himself, and others would correct them, gently, because the truth was strong enough. Tom Whitaker never called himself a hero. He kept the ledger on the shelf near the stove. Major kept his place by the door until the day his legs no longer let him climb the ridge trail without help. Even then, Tom carried him partway in an old canvas sling, grumbling the whole time while the dog watched the wind as if still on duty. And every winter, when snow came hard over Coldwater Pass, people looked toward Wolfpine Ridge. There, tucked inside the granite hollow, a small yellow light would burn against the dark. Not loud, not proud, just steady. And maybe that's why people still remember Tom and Major. Not because they were the strongest, not because they were the smartest, but because when everyone else looked away, they paid attention. When others laughed, they prepared. And when the storm came, they opened the door. If this story touched you, leave a simple one in the comments for Major. And leave a 0 if you believe loyalty is one of the most important things a person can have. I read your comments, and I'd love to know where you're watching from today. And if you enjoy heartfelt stories about veterans, loyal dogs, survival, courage, and second chances, be sure to subscribe and turn on notifications. There are many more unforgettable stories waiting just ahead. Until the next one, take care of yourself, take care of the people you love, and never underestimate the quiet ones who keep showing up when it matters most. Good night, and God bless.